Water is one of those issues that I would venture to say 80% of the United States pays very little, if any, attention to. We all take it for granted. We go every morning to the tap, we turn on the water faucet, and fresh, clean drinking water comes out. We very rarely have large public discussions in venues other than those that are water-centric about this water issue. But you're sitting in a community now that 20 years ago had an enormous wake-up call. And the sleeper issue became one of the central issues for the business community in Southern Nevada. All of a sudden, an issue that, like I said, nobody pays any attention to, became one of the top 3 issues that investment analysts looked at before they were willing to make an investment in business. It started with rapid growth, and rapid growth started leading to change. We were a very traditional, sleepy Western water utility. We were acrimonious, we enjoyed fighting with our neighbors, and then we found out in the 90s that that wasn't going to work. And so we came together and redefined the world of water in Southern Nevada. If you're a Westerner, and I don't know how many of you are Westerners and how many of you hearken from the East Coast, there is nothing more passionate in the West than a priority water right. First in time, first in right. It's the law of the West. It's what legends and myths are made of. Movies have been dedicated to it, and we threw them out. We said, this community will crater if we continue to hang on to vestiges that may have worked in the late 19th century, but cannot work in the 21st century. So we created a new organization called the Authority, throwing out our much heralded priority water rights, pooled our resources, both water resources, financial resources, began designing infrastructure that didn't necessarily only benefit one jurisdiction, but benefited the entire region. It's what allowed us to, through creative negotiations with our partners on the Colorado River, to survive the 90s and the economic boom of the 90s. And by the year 2000, I was able to take a 50-year resource plan to our board and to the community that gave this community a reliable water supply for 50 years. And then the unthinkable happened. We live in the Colorado River water community. And in the 1930s and up to the 1960s, we built infrastructure to manage and control this actually very meager river. Volumetrically, it's a joke when you compare it to either the Columbia River or, God forbid, the Mississippi River. It was assumed that there was 18 million acre-feet, and if you're not from the West and don't know what an acre-foot is, it's a measurement dear to our heart. It's an acre of land 1 foot deep. It's about 384,000 gallons, and it is the measure of thumb in the West. We in the Colorado River watershed, we controlled the river. We built Hoover Dam. We built Glen Canyon Dam. We built step dams all the way down to the Mexican border. And what started as a flood control project to protect the Imperial Valley after it was ravaged by flood in the early part of the 20th century became the most relied upon water supply project in the United States. And this meager river of merely 18 million acre-feet, which today most scientists will tell you isn't 18 million acre-feet in average flow, it probably will come in somewhere between 12 and 14 as an average run if we're lucky. We divided it up between 7 states, 2 countries, and a horde of users. Compare that amount of water that now supports 25% of this country's GDP with the Mississippi, where the Mississippi and the Missouri come together, 346 million acre-feet a year go past that point. It is phenomenal to think that man's ingenuity and man's ability to engineer and think about future generations created an infrastructure system on the Colorado River that has lasted the decades that it did. But what it never anticipated was the drought that began in 2000. And it got deeper, and it got deeper, and it got deeper. We had, until this year, 69% of average runoff. In 1 year, we only had 25% of normal in 2002. Lake Powell crashed. Lake Mead started going down. And this reliable system that we had all depended on, and upon which enormous economies and enormous investment, business investment, had been made, was evaporating before our eyes. Now, our 7 states in this basin have a rich history of warfare. There's nothing we love more than to hire the best, the brightest attorney, run to the Supreme Court, and confront each other. Here we sat in 2002, looking at each other saying, we're going to have to start implementing early cutbacks. We're going to have to start doing something fairly drastic and dramatic to change the way this system is operated in order for us all to survive. And through 4 of the most contentious years I've ever experienced, 4 of the most difficult sets of negotiations between states desperate to protect their communities, their agricultural industry, their recreational industry, we came out with a plan in 2007, the benefits of which we are reaping this year. We retooled the way we manage the Colorado River and forged partnerships that in 1980 would have been unthinkable, would never have been possible. Let's take a look for a minute at what this watershed represents. It's the largest artificial watershed in the United States. And I call it artificial because for the most part, when you look at how it's relied upon, it's man-made. It starts up in Wyoming, and by the time it hits Colorado, where the Continental Divide is, water that falls on the western side of the Continental Divide and is in the Colorado River watershed is moved through aqueducts across the Continental Divide, through the Rocky Mountains, to the Kansas-Nebraska watershed and the Front Range of Colorado, supporting Denver, Boulder, all those communities and any number of agricultural users. Travel on down to New Mexico. It leaves the Colorado River watershed through the tributary of the San Juan and travels into the Rio watershed to service Albuquerque. And now it's part of the Rio watershed that ends up down in Texas. In the Utah side, it travels hundreds of miles across the Utah desert to the Wasatch Front and supports the cities of Salt Lake and Provo and all the agricultural users in between. Down in Arizona, 380 miles of Central Arizona Project carry the Colorado River from Lake Havasu to Phoenix, Tucson, Scottsdale, and all the central cities of Arizona. On the other side of Lake Havasu, going to the west, you have Metropolitan's Aqueduct that takes it hundreds of miles to the coastal cities of Southern California, one of the 6th or 7th largest economy in the world, and 20 million inhabitants that depend on it. To the extent that Metropolitan is also connected to the Bay Delta, there's an interconnection. What happens in the Bay Delta matters in the Colorado River. And through that metropolitan connection, this artificial watershed reaches all the way up into the Bay Area. It then travels down into Mexico, where it's moved over into the Tijuana area, fuels any number of agribusinesses in Mexico, both of Mexican agribusiness and many American agribusiness ventures down in that area. The Imperial Valley is 11% of the country's fresh winter fruits and vegetables. All on a meager, let's say for purposes of argument, 16 million acre-feet a year, all fiercely dependent on one water supply. It's 90% of this community's water supply, and it was evaporating before our eyes.